I just wish I could go back to my younger self and say, like, be a little more aggressive, be a little bit more confident. I would just aim really high and try not to let the imposter stuff like get in your way, because it's really not going to matter.
Welcome to When You Grow Up, the podcast for conversations between students with goals and the people who have already achieved them. Brought to you by Hopkins Connect at Johns Hopkins University. In this podcast, we match students for a conversation with their dream mentor. Here's our student host for today's episode.
My name is Hanna Webster. I'm from San Diego, California, and I'm almost done with my master's degree from Johns Hopkins University, and I'm studying science writing. And today I'm speaking with Virginia Hughes.
My name is Virginia Hughes. I live in Brooklyn. I grew up in Michigan. I am a science editor at the New York Times, and I studied science writing in a master's program at Johns Hopkins. You're listening to the When You Grow Up podcast.
So let's just start at the, academic beginning. I saw that you also, correct me if I'm wrong, you have an undergraduate degree in neuroscience also?
Yes,
cool.
I do.
So then you made the switch to writing, you did the master's program. So in terms of us having similar backgrounds with the science first and then the writing, how do you have advice on how I can best take advantage of my science background for my writing career?
Yeah, I think that science journalists have kind of a leg up in this regard, because in my experience, most people who are trained in journalism, and certainly at national publications that don't specialize in science, other reporters don't want to do science or medical stories because they're really tricky. And if you don't have that background, you don't know how to read a scientific study. You don't know how to vet a scientific study. You don't know who to call to get comment on a scientific study. All the things that you and I and people who are trained in science understand just going in. So it does make it a little easier, I think, to get work at the beginning because you have a specialty, you have a niche specialty. On the flip side of that is that it's niche and not everyone cares or wants to, you're not writing about the war in Ukraine probably. So, but I do think for me anyway, kind of marketing myself and branding myself, I guess, as a science reporter and beyond that, even at a more micro scale, as a medical reporter or as a reporter specializing in neuroscience and genetics and medicine, like people then, editors, as you start working, come to know you for specific expertise. And there aren't very many people with exactly your expertise. So you kind of have a corner on the market, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've heard that kind of specializing can be important and helpful, especially with freelancing, because then you have, as they say, a beat, and editors will know to come to you for a specific story. Would you say that you started off specifically saying I write about neuroscience, and then kind of after you establish yourself, that branched out more?
Yeah, I mean, so when I first started out, I just said yes to everything. I started with a bunch of internships, as a lot of people do, and working with various editors in those internships. Even after the internships ended, they introduced me to other editors. And so one of the best internships I had was for the Johns Hopkins magazine, the alumni magazine. And the editor there, who at the time was Sue DiPasquale, she's since left, but she was an editor for other publications as well. So after my internship, she got me a lot of work, either herself commissioning me stuff or her other editors that she knew. But those publications were really all over the map. Some of it was technical, science stuff. I wrote a lot of stories for a magazine called Boss that was a trade publication for valve manufacturing company that I think they sent to their customers across the country. And so I would write stories for them, thousands of words on topics like cargo ships or how to make paper or how electricity is made. Like it's very basic kind of engineering things. I mean, I wrote stories for Johns Hopkins, like rheumatology newsletter, trying to think. I basically just tried to say yes to every assignment that I could get at the beginning, just to make as many connections I could and get as many clips as I could. And then I did start specializing over time, although it was a lot more bottom up than top down. You just start working, you get work where you can. And then the more reporting you do in a certain area, the more you know about it, the more stories you hear about it. So yeah, that's how it happened for me. But I mean, some of my friends in science writing swear by being a generalist. They really think that the stories are better, it's more interesting, you get more work if you kind of can write about a lot of things at once. So I think people can do both approaches.
Yeah, that's kind of happening to me with cannabis writing. I started out just after undergrad. I found a job. I was in a neuroscience lab studying cannabis, and then the job was writing about cannabis, science writing. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. So then I started writing about cannabis. And then I got this amazing opportunity to write a clip for the Post-Gazette. It just came out a couple of days ago. And the editor she was like, oh, I see you write about cannabis. I'm going to assign you a cannabis story. I guess I write about cannabis, which is great because I understand what you're saying with like it building, like the knowledge builds as you write about something. But I also see the benefit of diversifying too.
Yeah, for me, the diversification happened really naturally. Like let's say you work with an editor in one publication for a while and they like your work. And then maybe they end up assigning you something on a totally different topic. Then you take it and then maybe it gives you a chance to get interested in that. And then you can start pitching that topic to other editors, it comes up pretty, although when I was freelancing, I rarely did. Well, that's not true. I was going to say I rarely did non-science stories, but I did work with a lot of alumni magazines and I wrote a lot of profiles of people who were sometimes just like distantly related to science. So it was really like an opportunity to write a profile. It wasn't a ton of science in the story itself, but for the most part, I was only assigned science stories.
So you got your internships. You got some experience there, and then you freelanced for a while. What was it like juggling freelancing for 9 years before you did BuzzFeed?
I loved it. I loved freelancing so much. It definitely took a while. And at the beginning, when I first started freelancing, I had a part-time job on the side there was this blogging network called Science Blogs, and I was like the community manager of that. So I did have steady, and I also tutored on the side for a couple of years. So I did have some steady income that wasn't writing, which I think you have to at the beginning. It's just really hard to cobble together, especially if you live in an expensive city, which I did. But once I got the hang of it, and once I got a few steady clients, I switched to full-time within a year and a half or 2 years. And I don't know, it just kind of kept organically building. But freelancing was so fun. I mean, first of all, you have 100% control over what you do. And that doesn't mean you 100% like every assignment, but you're saying yes or no to an assignment for whatever reasons you want to. Either you need the money that month for rent, or you're really interested in a topic, or you really want to break into a new publication or whatever. But it's just a different psychological place when you're making the choices in your own career. And it's motivating because you know why you said yes to something. So even if you don't love an assignment, if you said yes to it because you need the money, you know why you're doing it. And it's just, it's not just like someone from on high telling you, please write this story because I want you to, which is just a slightly different. I mean, the negatives of freelancing are, of course, your income is not as steady. You have to figure out cash flow. You have to pay for your own benefits. there's a lot more uncertainty. There's a lot more like, wasted time when a story doesn't turn out, or when a pitch doesn't turn out the way you thought it would. It's like sunk time that was unpaid because it never results in a story, versus when you're on staff, if you get a story killed, you still got paid for all that work. So, but I mean, you can go to the grocery store in the middle of the day, you can work out in the middle of the day, you can work whatever hours make sense for you. You can go on vacation whenever you want. So yeah, it was a really wonderful lifestyle. And I thought that people who worked in offices were schmucks, and I thought I would never find myself doing that, which didn't turn out to be the case. But I did really strongly believe that for the first 9 years of my career.
I like what you said about saying yes to everything, because I've been freelancing for, I want to say 6 months now, and I'm experiencing some of what you just talked about with, I do like the freedom a lot of like, I have a doctor's appointment at 1, and so I'm going to leave and come back and I'm going to work out. And but also like, especially in the beginning, it's been like, okay, where am I going to find a story? And I'm going to do this 1,000-word story for $100 because that's what I can get. But I am, cross my fingers, starting to develop relationships with editors, make more connections. Like I'm writing a story for a publication now. I'm having an assignment now. That's my second for one publication. So that feels like good news.
And it's the same editor.
A different editor. She
Wow.
actually, she just so happened to leave and do something else. And then they brought a new one in. And so I took advantage of like, I'm introducing this editor to you all. And then he wants stories about this. And so then I got in there.
Smart. And did your old editor go to another publication?
I think so.
So you could potentially go back to your old editor and then have
That's
another.
Yeah. That's a good idea. So we covered freelancing versus staffing and the pros and cons. Okay, let's talk about your editor role. Do you have any particular pet peeves, or on the other end, anything that you'd love to see from writers that you work with?
I mean, like most editors, when a reporter files something really long, much longer than agreed upon, it's not good. I mean, it's not just like when I was a reporter, I thought maybe that's because the editors were lazy, or, they just didn't want to read your beautiful. It's not that. It's that it ends up being like exponentially more work, for the editor to try to cut something that's way too long. And I'm not talking about 10% long. I'm talking about like 50%, 100% longer than agreed upon. Like that's a reporter's job to sift through that and decide, like only the reporter can really decide what they feel like, which points are the most important points.
Yeah.
I mean, the editor can try to do that, but it's just, in the end, with all the back and forth, it just saves a lot of, so whenever a reporter files to me too long, I think I learned over time, like it's best not to edit that, just send it back, and say, please try again at the length we agreed on. But that's, not a big deal. And that happens to everyone. It's certainly something I did as a reporter too. So yeah, those are the things that come to mind, but I think, so now in my current job, I'm an editor at the New York Times and I have 4 reporters. But I do end up, because we do more news and just a higher volume of stuff, I have worked with more freelancers. I don't work with a ton of freelancers, but occasionally I have. And yeah, it is like the relationship you have with freelancers is different than your staff writers, just because you have much less of a relationship with them. You come in cold and you don't have the rapport. And so it becomes a lot more transactional, and the things you care about the most are honestly it being on time, it being at length, and it being the story that they said it was going to be. Because you just have less when you're signing something freelance, you have less kind of flexibility and less time to spend with someone. You just want it to be like,
done.
Yeah, it's not that you don't care about it. It's just, it tends to be like more straightforward, I guess. And you need it to be on, it tends to be a news story with an embargo. So you need it to be done like by a certain time, and you need the freelancer to be available for edits. Like it becomes a little bit more like structured, I guess, than it sometimes is with a staffer.
Okay, that makes sense. Did you ever have imposter syndrome, or do you have it, or?
Yeah, of course.
How did you?
If I could go back to my freelance self in particular, I did not pitch to big publications enough. I think I had this idea that there were legions of people who are much better than me, much older and wiser, and that also that if I pitched a story to like the Atlantic and they said no, that I blew my shot with that editor, and I really should wait until I have like the perfect story. And after becoming an editor, I realized that first of all, you get so many pitches, and I try to reply to everybody. I don't always, but I do my best to at least say like, no, thank you. I do not remember their names. I don't remember, I would not at all hold against, a pitch that was rejected to the next pitch. It's not something that I'm like, it's not something I'm thinking about. And the other thing that I realized when I became an editor is that there are certain freelancers, usually men, who pitch immediately, right? Again, like as soon as you say no to one pitch, they're like, oh, thanks so much for responding. Here's another idea for you. And it's good. You should do that. You've got their attention for a second. Like, and I just wish I could go back to my younger self and say, like, be a little more aggressive, be a little bit more confident. I wish, that I had the confidence of some at least male freelancers who are pitching to me now. I think it's smart. Like when an editor responds to you and says like, no, thank you, you've got them on your hook, or at least like you've got their attention, and your reply is going to be at the top of their inbox. It's actually a good opportunity to try again. I would just aim really high and try not to let the imposter stuff like get in your way, because it's really not going to matter. Like failing. Actually, my friend Rose Eveleth, who's another science writer, we've been on a few panels together, and she used to say that when you pitch a story to publication A, before you send that email, have the pitch ready for publication B. Have it all like written out and tailored to the second publication, so that in your head, you're assuming the first one is going to get rejected. And then if it does, you won't have this whole emotional, like, it got rejected. You can just press send on your second choice, and I think that's a really smart psychological move, just to get yourself in that, so that you don't just give up.
I like that. It does feel as a, I guess, beginning early career science writer that, I understand very much that rejection is part of the process, and it's not the fact of rejection, but I would say it feels stupid. Like I pitched a story maybe about 5 months ago, and it was the story I had written in the program. So I felt like, I had eyes on it, like it was the first draft was done at least. And I think my pitch wasn't specific enough. Like it wasn't that the story was bad, but maybe that I didn't communicate clear enough in the pitch, like why it was important for that publication. Because I got crickets. And then when I poked again, the editor got back and said, oh yeah, we've covered this a lot, which I did check before, because I know that is a thing that you don't just want to, like, without doing your research, send a pitch if they cover it a lot. And I checked, and I hadn't seen a story. It was about bioluminescence. I hadn't seen a story about bioluminescence from that publication in more than 3 years. So I was like, okay, great. And they got back to me and they said, yeah, this is something we cover. And I think just a story that highlights the existence of bioluminescence is not a good fit for us. And I felt so stupid. I was like, oh God, is he gonna like, oh, Hanna Webster, she thought this would be good and it wasn't. And that like, it feels like he's gonna remember my name and remember that I've like made a bad call. And so I guess it's reassuring to hear that you maybe don't remember everyone.
No, you really don't. I mean, you remember people who are rude, sometimes not very often at all, but every once in a while someone will be like extremely rude and offended by a polite rejection, and that is not a good look.
Right.
You're not going to lose this, or you're not going to win this argument by like protesting.
Yeah.
Just move on. So you remember kind of nasty interactions for sure, but yeah, normal, polite interactions, you don't. But that sounds like a situation where maybe it was the pitch where it wasn't clear what was new and what was exciting about it. They hadn't done before. I don't know if people in your program are willing to like look over pitches for you.
Yes. Yeah, I try to get a second eye on a pitch before I send it out, but I also get excited sometimes and just want to send it out.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, pitching is something that is great and you should do all the time. But at the beginning, I think for most freelancers, it's exactly what you're doing, like taking assignments when you can get them, taking the, because pitching is kind of hard to figure out. It's hard. It's a skill that the more stories you write, I think the more you understand how to pitch. And so it's like one of these chicken and egg things.
Yeah, I assume, or I guess hope that a lot of this will get easier as I do it.
Yes, it does for sure.
Besides the internships and saying yes to everything, was there anything else that you felt like you did early on that kind of jump started your career, or that you would recommend for early career science writers?
Yeah, I think a couple things that is kind of the same point. I had, like I said, I had this really good client, Spectrum, which part of why it was so good is that the volume was really high. I did for them after a while, I was doing like a lot of news stories at like 1 a week or 2 a week sometimes. And that discipline of doing news stories really regularly was really good practice. It was really good, like, and that's what you get as a staff writer, right? You have that regularity, and I think it made me faster, it made me better. And related to that, I got into blogging pretty early at various platforms. I was at Smithsonian for a little while, and then National Geographic. And actually before Smithsonian, I was at a writer's blog that we just did on our own. And that was, again, like a regular, like a weekly, assignment where I had to come up with something every week. And some of them were good, some of them maybe were not so good, but it was like a regular discipline that made me, and it also blogging, like, and the news writing, you get all these interactions from readers, you get a lot of tips. The more you report, the more you can keep reporting. And where you hear about stories, where you get pitch ideas, is talking to people on the phone, reporting from other stories. So I guess if you can find a gig that gives you regular reporting work, even if it's like not that, like after a while, writing a 500-word news story or 700-word news story is like maybe not the most exciting type of story that you want to write, but it's really good practice. And it's just like, it is the key to getting bigger stories, is doing smaller stories, I think, for most people. Oh, I have another tip too for finding stories. Go to scientific conferences.
Okay.
Go, and especially like the Society for Neuroscience, like some of these huge conferences, just go to the poster sessions. You'll see hundreds or thousands of posters, And you can go talk to postdocs, you can go talk to grad students. Most posters are not newsworthy, right? They're like really incremental, but it's just like an opportunity where you have a ton of scientists presenting new stuff that they're planning on publishing in the next 6 months or a year. And you can kind of do some scouting work beforehand with the abstracts and figure out which are the best labs, or kind of like the best well-known labs. And this is your chance to like meet the grad student or the postdoc who's going to be the first author on that Nature paper next year or Neuron paper next year. It's just a really good, and because they tend to be younger, the junior people in the lab, I always liked, it's like less intimidating to approach them and to talk about their work. And it's and now that I'm a little older, those people are PIs now. So just starting those relationships early, getting to know, most of the scientists presenting their poster have never talked to a journalist before, right? It's like their first project. They're going to be intimidated by you too. So it's just a nice, I found a bunch of stories I ended up pitching from conferences. Just you hear something early, and then you can find out when the paper's coming out and be able to pitch it before the editors heard of it. I think one mistake freelancers make is they pitch you on a Nature study that's in the press pack that week.
Right.
Literally every reporter at every outlet knows about it, and probably a staff, a paper like the Times has somebody covering it already. So, you want to pitch unique or kind of like new stuff.
Yeah. Just logistically, would you go like with your recorder and just like walk up to someone, turn it on and say like, tell me about your study, and just like, let them talk?
Exactly that. Yeah. I mean, you could explain to them who you are and that you're a writer and that you're not sure if it's going to be in a public, but yeah, those conferences, I mean, some conferences have different rules about that. There are certain conferences that are very quiet and elite, and they don't let reporters report on stuff. But generally, if somebody's got a poster, that abstract is online somewhere. It's not exactly secret. It's a public, it's public information, and you should be able to report on it for most certainly the big conferences.
Great. Yeah. I did the NSA and ASW mentorship program recently, and we attended like a virtual AAAS talk. And so that was sort of like a mini version of what you're talking about. We just picked one session to report on.
That's good. Yeah. The only problem with AAAS is every science journalist in the country is at that meeting.
Yeah. So that's all my specific questions. Well, thank you so much for
you've taken me back to the glory days of freelancing.
Oh, that's good to hear, because it doesn't feel like it right now.
Yeah. Hang in there.
Thank you. I appreciate the insight very much. And I feel like sometimes my excitement about wanting to be further along, I have to like remember that I just need to keep acquiring experience and stories, and that it'll just take time.
It will, but also bottle up that ambition and use it, because that's an asset for you too, to keep pushing when it's hard.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
No problem.
You have been listening to When You Grow Up, the podcast for conversations between students with goals and the people who have already achieved them. Thank you to our When You Grow Up podcast student team and all the people who make this podcast possible, including our editors, Thomas Nishimoto and Josh Felton, our relationship associates, Camille Blake and Laura Flynn, our marketing coordinator, Himanshi Sharma, our project manager, Ben Stevens, our host students, and all of our guests.